Well, this is Craig Dearden. Craig lives in Cambridge in the UK. He trained as a social worker, and his real passion is that adults with learning difficulties and adults with physical disabilities should lead full and economically productive lives in our societies. And to try and reach that vision of his, he created a small charity called Speaking Up, based in Cambridge. And I met Craig about 7 or 8 years ago when he had developed a very successful model of working with people, particularly adults with learning difficulties. And in fact, he was beginning to develop not only a charity which supported them and enabled them to live at home independently, but he began to set up a consulting arm from his charity, and he sold consulting time to companies and local government employers to help them understand how to bring adults with learning difficulties into the working place. And the really neat thing about his consultancy is that his consultants were these people, adults with learning difficulties. And I think, when I met him, I really discovered a very passionate and inspiring person. But at the time, I sensed he'd kind of reached a plateau, because his real vision was to take this model nationwide. He'd piloted, he'd tested it in the Cambridge area, and I think it was radical, and I think it met the needs of these people and encouraged employers to take them into full-time productive employment. But his vision was, if I can do it in Cambridge, can I do this in every city in the UK? And that's where he faced what is the common problem of many social entrepreneurs, and that is access to the kind of financial capital and the kind of business skills that helps a social entrepreneur grow, develop, and scale up what they do best. Now, fortunately, along came one of the UK's first venture philanthropy funds. And Impetus saw Craig and Speaking Up not so much as an NGO to be given a grant, but as an organization, a business to be invested in. And that was a very different kind of way of looking at an organization like this. So over a period of 3 or 4 years, Impetus worked with Craig on a very credible plan to scale up what he was doing, to deepen and improve the quality of what he was providing, but also to scale it across the whole of the UK. And I think it was a very early example in Britain of the involvement of a venture philanthropy fund in helping grow the radical ideas of a social entrepreneur. That's a quote there from Craig as he came out of this funding relationship. Impetus has enabled us to take bold steps and grow at a much faster pace. Our income has more than trebled since the start of our relationship, and we've been able to help many more disabled people take control of their lives. I'm quite sure that with the kind of energy that Craig had, he probably could have achieved this rate of growth over many years. But the acceleration that was given to him by the development capital, plus the business skills that Impetus came and offered him, I think allowed him to do that much quicker and much more professionally. And in fact, interestingly for Speaking Up and Craig, with the exit of the first venture philanthropy fund, he is now being invested in by a second venture philanthropy fund. In fact, one which is helping him now go through a merger to increase the scale of what he's doing in the UK. We clearly have a medical theme in this session, so I've put a DNA molecule in there. Why a DNA molecule? Well, one of my heroes in the British venture capital industry is Ronnie Cohen. Sir Ronald Cohen was really the pioneer of venture capital in the UK during the 1970s. Having learned how to do it in the US, he brought the model to the UK, and the rest, as they say, was history. He's developed a very successful company and has really promoted and grown the whole venture capital industry in the UK over 30 years. And Ronald Cohen says that there's a relationship between entrepreneurs and venture capital, and it's like the two strands of the DNA molecule. Each, as it grows, mutually supports the growth of the other. It's a real intimate relationship between venture capital and entrepreneurship. And I would suggest that there is a similar relationship between venture philanthropy and social entrepreneurs. Social entrepreneurs deserve and need the kind of capital that is available to their counterparts in the commercial world. Well, I've been privileged to watch the growth of the venture philanthropy industry across Europe over the last 5 or 6 years. I've got on the screen just a few of the logos of some of the venture philanthropy funds that are currently operational across Europe. The first group have in common the fact that they are funds that have all come from people with a private equity, venture capital, or an investment background. Impetus, I mentioned. Oltre in Italy comes from Luciano Balbo, who was the pioneer of private equity in Italy. Bonventure is a collection of family offices in Germany. The Private Equity Foundation, more recently, is an amalgamation of about 100 private equity firms and professional service firms across the world to create a foundation which uses these principles of bringing development capital plus business skills to service the needs of social entrepreneurs. And LGT, that we've already heard mentioned and which Dave will talk about in more length, is again an example of an investment house stepping into this space and bringing their tools and their enthusiasm for investment. That's a slightly controversial one. This is an amazing venture philanthropy fund. It is linked to a hedge fund in the UK. It's actually an activist hedge fund, TCI, and those of you in the investment business will know that as a hedge fund, it is quite controversial in the way that it works. What marks out TCI as a hedge fund is not so much its investment principles for me, but the fact that it has structurally arranged the hedge fund so that a percentage of its assets under management and a percentage of its management fee annually go into the foundation. In 6 years, it has generated 1 billion euros of philanthropic capital from the profits of that hedge fund. 1 billion euros of philanthropic capital through the structural relationship between a hedge fund and a foundation. That is remarkable in itself. The One Foundation in Ireland, created by an entrepreneur from the Ryanair family. Here's a group of foundations, traditional grant makers in Europe, who have now stepped into this space, realizing that while grant making is good, very often just grant making is not enough to bring the kind of finance that we need into the entrepreneurial non-profit space. The B one there is the King Baudouin Foundation. It's the largest and most prestigious of the Belgian foundations, and it has this month opened its own specialist venture philanthropy unit. So it's very encouraging to see more traditional grant makers, rather than being resistant to this kind of finance, many of them are embracing it. They're not just funding it and co-funding it, they're also operating their own specialist units. Sometimes venture philanthropy funds are set up by social entrepreneurs. The little orange flower is the Good Deed Foundation in the small country of Estonia. Nest is well known probably to many of you as operational in Latin America and in Central Eastern Europe. And who knows better than a social entrepreneur the heartaches of trying to raise the right kind of capital to grow and develop your ventures. And Breakthrough, which you may remember from the previous slide, invested in a second round of investing in Craig's organization, a remarkable collaboration between Permira, the second largest private equity fund in Europe, and Community Action Network, a support agency for social enterprises. Breakthrough is a remarkable collaboration bringing business skills and business capital and the know-how of social enterprise into a fund that serves the needs of social entrepreneurs. That's just a snapshot of where in Europe we've got over the last 5 or 6 years. European venture philanthropy, in contrast perhaps to the US, where many of its techniques were developed, is highly networked. That network really comes because of the work of the European Venture Philanthropy Association. That EVPA now has 120 members across 25 European countries, so it is networked. It is able to draw in good practice. It is very strongly linked to the private equity community. And as someone who spent their lives working in non-profits, I actually find it quite encouraging to see the finance and the skills from the private equity industry and community coming into this space and helping social entrepreneurs. And it's highly collaborative in spirit. What we're doing in Asia now, and we've really just started this process, is to suggest that it could be useful for Asia's social entrepreneurs to have a number of venture philanthropy funds operating right across the region. And to encourage the growth of this movement, we're launching the Asia Venture Philanthropy Network next year, and I hope that will be something that will encourage and grow this movement from India to Australia. We've already made some success. We have a number of financial sponsors who come from the private equity industry and a number of professional service firms who are helping us with our launch strategy. So as they say, watch this space. This time next year, we hope to have the beginnings of a vibrant venture philanthropy network. And we hope that network will connect to really good practice in Europe so that we can learn from Asia and vice versa, and also connect to excellent venture philanthropy funds that exist in the US, including those like VPP, New Profit, and of course, the Robin Hood Fund in New York. So let's see how this develops over the next 12 or so months. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And now we turn to Dev, who is based in Bangkok and is going to give us a regional and local perspective as well. Dev.
Thank you, Chuchu. So I'm from a group called LGT Venture Philanthropy Foundation, and we're basically part of LGT Group, which is working in traditional asset management and wealth management services. Now, all of a sudden, we can see that there's a shift in the banking industry to try to make philanthropy as a service as part of wealth and asset management. And so we're positioned in between traditional charities and venture capital companies. I'll tell you for a reason why later on, but if you want to support both non-profit and for-profit social organizations, you'll need to put together appropriate forms of capital and appropriate forms of resources to really support them. This is mainly why we are positioned in between both spheres. And so as a result, we make use of grants, loans, and equity instruments. In terms of loans, it's usually in terms of soft loans, so it's non-collateralized, low interest, sometimes based on the market rate. Really, the idea is to structure the most conducive mechanism to support the growth of the enterprise. Now, any profit generated by the fund is then channeled back into the foundation. Okay. And we're a global team now with over 20 people, and we work across 3 main themes. The first one being alleviation of human suffering, education, and creation of sustainable livelihoods. Now, we're trying to keep the themes as broad as possible because the idea is to provide this as a service to our clients. So clients will be able to conduct philanthropy alongside the Princely family, or we can tailor specific services for them based on their preferences. We have people working in 5 regions in Africa, Latin America, India, China, Southeast Asia. Now, I think a lot of us getting latched on to specific concepts like social enterprises and so forth, but I think if we can sort of boil down or go behind the curtain a little bit and see that essentially what all organizations create is value. And what happens is all organizations create a blended form of value. There are organizations which create both social and environmental and economic value at the same time. It's not to say that businesses do not create social value. They create jobs, they pay taxes, and so do a lot of traditional nonprofits. It's a huge industry, actually, in most countries. And so our focus really falls in that space where we work with traditional nonprofits that have a social bottom line, and also organizations that have dual bottom lines, where they try to optimize a social return and a financial return at the same time. Some of you can think of a group like, you can think of a hybrid organization like, say, World of Good. So they have a nonprofit which does a lot of capacity building work with their rural artisans, and they have a commercial entity which actually focuses on trading a lot of the crafts that they source from the artisans. As a result, by working with blended value organizations, you want to be able to put together patient capital for a lot of them, because donors can fund a lot of seed startup work, but they'll need access to patient forms of capital like low interest loans and forms of equity that can help them scale. So once they've proven their model, that's ideally where we want to work with them. A few examples of organizations within our portfolio include one called Mothers to Mothers in South Africa, and the whole idea there is to help train mothers to reduce HIV transmission from mothers to children. Now, they're a grant-based organization because essentially there's no business model behind something like that. So the idea for us was to really help them access bigger donors, and so we provided bridge financing to help them access groups like WHO and USAID, because the bigger donors require scale. So we provided that middle gap to help them scale. Another interesting group is Mandeshi in India. So they're a combination of a business school and microfinance institution for rural women. So that you can see this combination of financial literacy and access to credit enables them to start small businesses and create access to livelihoods down the line. We're in the process of actually finalizing an interesting deal in India. The essentials are that they use renewable energy, which is out of rice husks, and turn that into low-cost electricity for off-the-grid communities in India. And they've actually attained price points which are lower than that of kerosene, wind, solar, and even the grid. But this is all dependent on the fact that they have access to proper feedstock. And so we're helping them scale to about 20 power plants in the regions of Bihar and Gorakhpur and so forth. In the Philippines, we're working with a group called Water Hope, and the idea there is to provide access to clean water to rural communities in the Philippines. So you can see from the portfolio that there's really a blend of various types of organizations where some have inherently no business model and need access to grants to grow. But then on the other hand, you have other organizations that need more patient forms of capital to grow. I think the concept of charity has always existed in this region for a long time, and I think the evolution is occurring to start thinking about philanthropy, because philanthropy requires a little bit more strategic thinking, and it's always occurred in Asia, at least, for faith-based issues or within the family. And I think the conditions are actually ripe to work and address a lot of the issues in the region, because while there is a lot of wealth in the region, there's also great disparity. And I think Asia has the right amounts of talent, has indigenous models, and just needs access to the right amounts of structuring and resources to help them grow. I think additionally, areas of interest for Singapore at the same time would be, because at least in Southeast Asia, Singapore is ahead of the curve in terms of thinking of philanthropy more strategically. And funding is naturally a given to work with both on issues in Singapore and countries in the region. But I think more importantly, social enterprises or non-profits in the region need access to talent. And I think that's where Singapore can really contribute a lot of talent to these kinds of enterprises in other regions. Additionally, I also think that perhaps philanthropy can be thought of as a new path to ensuring security in the region. Because by building economic prosperity in other countries in the region, you ultimately enhance security here. And I think to close off, my final message was that I think there's a huge sense of urgency, particularly in developing countries, and I think we have knowledge. All we need to do is really come together and build upon our efforts. Thank you.